Okay. Happy Sunday, everybody. Welcome back to day 7, which is our second bonus day of crush anxiety-induced procrastination. I'm going to give you some conceptual understanding of performance anxiety today, and then give you some practical steps on how to deal with it. Just a caveat that my family has been a little sick and I'm starting to come down with it, so I'm going to do my best today, but I'll probably keep it short and sweet and just kind of hang with however it is that I'm feeling, which is a little nauseous and a little low energies. So I hope you guys are feeling better than I am this weekend. At any rate, let's dive in. Just a quick reminder that replays are going to be up until Tuesday night. So if you've missed anything from this week, there are a couple of references for the bonuses that refer back to like a day 3 or day 5, and you don't really know what that is. You can find all of the replays in the featured guides section of the group, the featured posts, and then there's also a specific replay section in the guides portion of the group. So make sure that you grab all of that information before it comes down on Tuesday. And if you can't find it, let me know, and we will make sure that you get those. Okay, so another reminder, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out or drop a comment, message me, whatever uh, method is best for you. I'm going to be fielding questions and having conversations and getting into messages all this week. Okay, so let's start talking about performance anxiety. So for me, this started when I was 5 and I participated in my first piano competition. Some of you may have heard this story before, but my piano teacher had forgotten to tell me to bring my piano book. So I got disqualified from the competition, and the judges were nice enough to let me perform, but I was really flustered. I was, so young at the time. I messed up on one of the songs, and some of the kids laughed. And looking back, there might have only been like 10 kids in the room, and objectively not a huge deal, but the humiliation to my 5-year-old self at the time was really unbearable. So I remember afterwards walking out of the competition. I remember my older brother piling on and sort of making fun of me about it. And after that, I remember sort of making this decision that I would never let anyone laugh at me again. And my solution was to try to be the best that I could at everything. So I started practicing like crazy, and from that point on, um, I think I won first place in every competition that I entered until I was about 12 or 13, which was a pretty good streak. But of course, that comes at a cost, which was the first emergence of anxiety into my system. So the main problem with anxiety is that it's never really a performance issue. So if anything, the highest achievers tend to struggle most with anxiety because our value hinged on getting approval and praise from others instead of simply being okay with yourself. So this dynamic will often get triggered when you're in a performance situation. So it could be that you're a musician or a stage actor, or you're giving a presentation at work, anything where you have some kind of audience. So we're going to unpack that today. But first, let me know what's been your experience with performance anxiety. Drop it in the comments. If you're on replay, also drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Just a reminder that we are all here to support each other. So it's really great to have your contributions. Okay. So yeah, what has been your experience with performance anxiety? What's been your experience dealing with an audience, and how do you feel when you get into those situations? So I'm going to walk you through the 3 stages of performance anxiety, which is nothing groundbreaking, but I think is a helpful way to talk about it. So the first stage that I'm going to talk about here is pre-performance. So for most of us, we can relate to this, right? During the pre-performance stage, anxiety starts to build as you anticipate the upcoming event. And this is often due to pressure of expectations, fear of failing, being concerned about others judging us. Physical symptoms start to manifest, such as increased heart rate, maybe you're sweating more, and nervousness may start to appear. And that happens because oftentimes the mind starts to overanalyze what could go wrong. And that leads to, of course, worry and stress. And this anxiety is usually driven by uncertainty and the fear of negative outcomes, such as making mistakes or not meeting your expectations or not meeting others' expectations. So the impact here, while some level of anxiety can be motivating, we've heard that talked about a lot, right? There's a healthy level of nervousness or anxiety getting into a situation like that, so you can mobilize the energy. But too much can lead to self-doubt and a loss of focus. It can also cause you to feel overwhelmed even before the actual performance begins, and it makes it harder to concentrate and actually prepare for whatever it is that you need to do. And of course, like I mentioned, it impacts the nervous system. So you feel the physical symptoms, sweaty palms, butterflies in the belly, tension, etc., right? So if you can relate to this, let me know. Thumbs up, heart. What's your experience of pre-performance anxiety? The next stage is right before the performance begins, or as the performance begins, the anxiety just peaked. That often starts to shift. So some of you may experience more of a sense of flow, actually, as you engage with whatever it is that you're doing. And others might continue to actually feel anxious. And during this stage, the focus is usually on execution. And the intensity of the anxiety can fluctuate depending on how well you think the performance is going or how badly you think the performance is going, right? So this ongoing pressure to perform well, combined with the fear of making mistakes in real time, can keep anxiety levels elevated. But of course, sometimes you begin to feel confident or you feel like you're receiving positive feedback, and the anxiety may decrease as you become more absorbed and present to the activity. So high anxiety during performances can obviously lead to mistakes, right? You have more tension, there's a lack of spontaneity. Maybe the nervousness keeps you from actually doing what you want to do. So let me know if you can relate to this. This is like a sense of like needing to stick to the script so tightly that there's not much flow. But of course, if you manage that well, it can also heighten your alertness and focus, and that can actually lead to a strong performance. So there's a balance there. So let me know where you are on that spectrum, where you are in terms of balancing that out. And the third stage of performance anxiety is obviously post-performance. And after the performance anxiety generally starts to subside, but this stage can also bring a mix of relief as well as self-criticism, right? So you may overthink on your performance or over-critique what went well and what didn't. And the level of anxiety post-performance can depend on your outcome, on the outcome, and your perception of how you performed. So this occurs because it just stems from sort of an over self-evaluation, a concern about external feedback. So even if the performance was successful, and usually it turns out that it's all fine, perfectionists, or those of you with really high expectations, you may continue to feel anxious as you replay the event in your mind. So if you are overly critical of yourself, post-performance anxiety can certainly linger, and that affects your confidence in future performances, obviously. But on the other hand, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes here, positive reflection can lead to a sense of accomplishment. The issue is that in both cases, you're dependent on the external validation for you to feel okay. So the goal in today's session is for us to be able to stay connected to our essential power, which is what we talked about on day 3, this aspect of presence, that's a sense of fullness and capacity, I am here-ness, and it has a sense of unshakability to it in a way. This understanding of performance anxiety can help in developing strategies or techniques to manage it effectively at each stage. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so drop some questions in if you have questions, but otherwise I'm going to keep on going. You might have noticed that in all of these three stages, perception of others shows up. And where have we seen this idea of perception show up in this week in all the sessions that we've talked about? So yes, the anxiety ratio, perceived threat divided by our perceived capacity to cope with that threat. So if that ratio is bigger than 1, then anxiety gets triggered. Yeah. And where else have we seen this idea of perceiving what others think of us? So that comes with the anxiety template, right? Perception is also embedded in the anxiety template that we talked about on day 5. So remember what we talked about on day 5 is object relations theory, and that says that the interactions and connections that we form as children create really lasting memories in our minds, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And these early experiences influence our self-image, how we relate to others, and how we handle anxiety and stress. So when we are in a situation when we're performing and there's an audience, this template gets automatically activated and overlaid onto the situation, right? So how does this work? The audience automatically becomes the other or the object in the template. And unconsciously, we assume that they will be critical, judgmental, rejecting, etc. Or if we make a mistake, they'll just skewer us somehow, right? So if you look at this just simply from a rational perspective or look at it very plainly, your conscious mind will probably say, well, that's not going to happen. Like that's very, very unlikely that that's going to, somebody is going to outrightly reject you. But in our subconscious mind, we are actually thinking this. There is some deep belief that we are going to get rejected by the other. And even if you can't see the audience, right? So, this is often the case when you're in a performance, right? You cannot see people's reactions, right? Or you can't really, a lot of times the audience is like in this case, I don't really know who's in the audience, who is actually listening to this in the moment. So it's very easy for us to overlay this template and just plaster the other and our assumptions onto the audience. So we will do that unconsciously and in most cases automatically. In other words, this is all happening, this performance anxiety and this anxiety template is happening internally and really has not much to do with the actual situation or audience at all. Okay. So what do we do about this? Hold on for a second. These weren't all supposed to come up at once, but there you are. So the bulk of this work comes up for us in up front in the pre-performance stage. And these are the recommended steps that I will help my clients go through. And it's all application from all the concepts that we talked about this week, right? So just being able to see that there is a perceived threat, that you're viewing it through this lens is huge. And starting to challenge that assumption and even just start to question it, is the audience actually a perceived threat? And then we want to see how we're feeling about our capacity to cope and what actually is going on there. Is your 5-year-old self who just had no capacity to deal with rejection or humiliation operating in the present moment? Or do you feel more connected with your adult self that has more capacity, more understanding, more compassion, all of these things? So just seeing through the lens of the anxiety ratio and just running it through that filter will help distance yourself or create some separation from performance anxiety already. So recognizing then the anxiety template and its components is step number 3. So we start to get a sense of what this anxiety template feels like the more that we get accustomed to it. We start to see, oh, there is some kind of template or object relations thing that's happening where a younger part of myself or a not so present part of myself is getting overlaid, and I'm making assumptions about the audience that I'm going to get rejected or that I'm going to not be accepted, right? So we want to look at in step number 4, what assumptions about the other are in the template. And on the flip side, what assumptions about yourself are in the template? Remember, object relations has 2 parts, right? There's the other and the assumptions that we have about what's going to come from the outside. And then there's also the impact in the sense of how you are in that template. Are you feeling fearful? Are you feeling small? Are you feeling overwhelmed, right? So those are all things that are in this early relationship template. And then finally, this is the way to work through it. We don't try to change that at all, but what we're doing is actually anchoring ourselves or grounding ourselves in the present moment. So what is it like to actually be fully present? And as we go through this process, it's a matter of feeling both the template and also what is actually real and what your direct immediate experience is, because that's going to be a kind of knowing that you can't finagle in your mind. You'll just know that you're safe the more directly connected you are as well. Okay. So those are the steps that we do upfront pre-performance to kind of clear the slates or just get some understanding and some more awareness of what's actually going on as anxiety arises pre-performance. Okay, so right before this is right before performance, by the way. All the stuff that we did in this pre-performance stage ends up being a kind of like a cheat sheet. So you can refer back to, oh, like, what am I perceiving as the threat? What's my capacity? What's my anxiety template saying? And we often have, like, what I do with my clients is like make a little cheat sheet. And the cheat sheet just kind of goes through all of those steps really quickly. So right before a competition or a performance or some kind of presentation, you can just check your cheat sheet to see, all right, let me just like get a hang of this. And if that anxiety template is operating and getting amplified, that's just part of the process. And what you can do is start to reassure the you that's in the anxiety template, the self-image of being small and weak and overwhelmed, and you're going to get rejected. And instead replace that and reassure that part with your own support, reassurance, and love. So you're actually starting to impact that anxiety template. You're starting to shake it up a little bit and challenge that it's actually true or not, right? And the third step is to accept, accept, accept. No matter what happens, this is the most important thing. Whether or not you deem the performance as successful or not, it is so important for us to accept whatever the outcome is. When we can do that, the anxiety itself starts to reduce, and we can go back to the anxiety template and the anxiety ratio to understand why. Okay, so during the performance, it's a little bit like you've taken a leap, right? Everything beforehand is like the ride up to the top of the roller coaster. And when the performance starts, you sort of have to ride it out. But there are things that you can do to help make that ride more enjoyable. So presumably you're performing because you like to do it, whether it's playing an instrument, you're dancing, acting, giving a presentation, etc. There are some cognitive techniques that can help you during the performance itself. So the first technique is what's called micro-focusing, and that's just breaking down the performance into small, manageable tasks or sections and focus on completing each one successfully. So if you're playing a piece of music, instead of thinking about getting through the entire night, you think about just getting through one section of music. Okay, so this helps because it reduces the sort of overwhelm of the performance. It allows you to concentrate on one step at a time, and that really makes it easier for you to actually stay present, right? Okay. So the second piece here is an audience perspective shift. And this is kind of playing with this anxiety template a little bit. So instead of viewing the audience as judges, you might reframe and imagine them as supporters who want to see you succeed, which is actually mostly the case. The audience generally wants you to do well because they don't want to sit through a poor performance or whatever. So shifting your perception of the audience from critics to allies can really reduce that performance pressure and make the experience much more enjoyable. The third piece here is similar, reframing anxiety as excitement, right? So telling yourself that what you're actually feeling is excitement and not anxieties, because both emotions actually trigger similar physiological responses like increased heart rate, adrenaline, cortisol, right? So reframing anxiety as excitement can actually help the nervous system interpret it differently and turn it into a more positive experience that enhances your performance instead of taking you out of it where you're trying to run from it. So you're shifting from seeing anxiety itself as a perceived threat to something that's actually fun, like going down the roller coaster, right? So that's another thing that you can do. And the last thing is grounding through sensory input. And this is basically another way of saying be as mindful as possible. So using your senses to ground yourself in the moment, such as feeling the texture of an object in your hand, listening to the sound of your voice, noticing the temperature in the room. This helps break the cycle of anxious thoughts and having this anxiety template get overly activated or overly prioritized in your system by bringing your attention back to the physical environment, right? So what that does is make the anxiety template that's operating underneath the surface a little less pulley, less strong, because the more present we are, the more in touch we are with our immediate direct experience. And when we're more in touch with what's happening right now, the less influence that anxiety template has on us, the less influence the past has on the present. Okay, so we'll talk just a couple of minutes about the post-performance anxiety. So the first step for post-performance is always to watch out for the inner critic to come in and just tear you apart. Okay, so remember that's part of the anxiety template too. The more then that you can stay with your direct experience, the more that you have the capacity to dismantle the inner critic and call BS on whatever commentary that it has. You should have played it this way. You should have done better. You should have XYZ, whatever the message or criticism is. And this can be a very tricky sort of thing because the inner critic usually has a tinge of truth to it, because there are always places where we can improve, right? But with the inner critic, there's always also uh, a a wallop of harshness or meanness that can really take you down. So if you need a refresher on how to recognize and dismantle the inner critic, you can review day 2 uh, and review those sessions that we talked about during that session. Okay, so when you do that, you naturally start to open to self-compassion. No matter how well the performance went or how poorly, self-compassion can arise more naturally without the inner critic being there. So self-compassion is a quality of being able to stay with the reality of your situation. So we know that not all performances or presentations or whenever you're in front of an audience, you're not always going to be perfect. Not all performances will get a standing ovation. You're not going to win every pitch. You're not always going to get positive feedback. So self-compassion is the capacity for us to be with the outcome. So don't underestimate how powerful this actually is. If we go back to the anxiety ratio and we look at our capacity to deal with perceived threat. That's 50% of the ratio. So self-compassion gives us a ton of capacity to be with whatever's happening, including if you made a mistake or if you completely bombed and failed and humiliated yourself. That self-compassion says that's okay. And you might say, well, that feels lousy. I never want to do that again. I just want to curl up into a ball and die. Self-compassion still says that's okay. And there's a really prominent researcher now named Kristin Neff. If you haven't heard of her, her stuff is really great. And she focuses on researching self-compassion and has produced a bunch of studies to demonstrate how self-compassion can improve motivation and performance. And in one of these studies, individuals with higher levels of self-compassion were found to have a 34% lower fear of failure compared to those with lower self-compassion. So that's quite a significant reduction in fear, and it allows people to take on challenges with less anxiety, right? So we're talking about this week about anxiety-induced procrastination. So imagine just right off the bat having a third less anxiety, a third less fear of failure, so that it's less likely that you're going to get into that anxiety procrastination cycle. So when you clear out the judgments and the critiques of the inner critic and you're supported with self-compassion, you're much more able to have balanced, objective reflection. And that's really how we improve and not get stuck in a kind of perfectionism, right? This is a really big shift for a lot of performers because we are so trained to focus on the outcome. We have to play all the right notes, right? We have to not make mistakes. We have to hit every sort of nuance. And in the process of doing that, a lot of times we lose touch with the joy of performing itself. So this shift leads us to a very profound kind of perspective, which is that we can use performance as an opportunity to grow. So this means that it's not the end all be all is not about achieving the goal or the outcome. It's not about winning. It's not about getting the praise or the positive feedback or some oomph to your self-value. It's more about being present. And in that presence, there's power and compassion and vulnerability, joy, beauty, all of the reasons why we love great performances, right? So every performance can be like that. And if you've been tuning in this week, every actually experience that we have in our life, not just performances, that every actual experience that we have in our life can be an opportunity for us to learn more about ourselves, to see what's operating underneath the surface, to see through the anxiety templates that are at play so that we can actually start to free ourselves. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions. Let me know how you're feeling about this. Just check in with yourself briefly. And I'm going to close again by just a reminder that the Anxiety Breakthrough Program is open. Enrollment is happening now. And this is, again, where we go through stages that we covered this week to create inner space, dismantle the inner critic, really bring awareness and presence to these early relationship templates where anxiety itself, again, is embedded. And ultimately, what we do is to dissolve them. So anxiety no longer gets triggered. And it is possible for us to no longer have those operating underneath the surface without us knowing and impacting our lives. And obviously, this week we've talked about anxiety-induced procrastination. So that is one of the things that we look at in this 6-month course. So by the end of 6 months, your anxiety ratio baseline, where our goal is to shift that down to below 1 and constantly be below 1. So anxiety is not overwhelming and does not get triggered. And like I mentioned yesterday, to really accelerate that and to support you, if you sign up before Tuesday, you get all of the workshop bonuses and prizes and on-demand coaching. And this is a bonus which I've never offered before. It's basically real-time live support. You can call me anytime. And basically, I'll get back to you as soon as possible, if not then, and walk you through wherever you're at And mostly that's just helping you be exactly where you are. And when you can be where you are, this is where you start to see where are my perceived threats? How am I feeling about my capacity to deal with those perceived threats? And then actually starting to work through some of these anxiety templates that are very, very early templates based on our early relationships. So reach out, message me, let me know if you have any questions about that. And we will have a couple of other bonus days tomorrow, and then we will wrap on Tuesday. So again, replays are available until Tuesday night. All of the special offers for the Anxiety Breakthrough Program ends on Tuesday. If you are not interested in the program or can't swing that financially, still reach out to me if you're interested in doing work, because there are group coaching options and there are individual one-on-one options that are not the program. But we have 2 more days to do that. So tomorrow I'm going to be providing a recap of all 5 days from last week. And on Tuesday, we'll dive into actually getting anxiety-free sleep, which I know is very, very important for all of us, and its impact on anxiety and healing anxiety. So reach out to me if you have questions. It was really great being here with you. Again, apologies, I'm a little bit sick today and I'm sort of pushing through this and doing the best that I can. So I'm mustering my own self-compassion and letting myself just be where I am. So I hope you guys have a great rest of the weekend, and let me know if you have questions, and I'll see you tomorrow. All right, take care, everybody.